record. So we're reading the laws, we're reading Maimonides code of law, codified from the Talmud, and we're focusing on the laws of edut, of witnesses. So there's a full section in Maimonides called, it's in the 14th book, called the Book of Judges. And there's a section that contains 22 chapters on the laws of witnesses. Like we mentioned last time, the laws of witnesses are very important for Jewish law because, according to the Torah, I would say, with few exceptions, in general, the only method of proof would be testimony of two witnesses. There are some exceptions to the rule, but biblically speaking, if you want to prove anything, you need to have two witnesses. And now the question becomes: how do you accept the witnesses? What are the laws of the witnesses? What the qualifications of testimony is, and also very important, how do we question the witnesses? Like we mentioned, the logic behind having two witnesses is that if two people see the same thing, you can separate the two, you can question them, and then you can see if their story holds up to scrutiny. As opposed to one person, there's no way to know if the person is saying the truth or not. Here, there's at least some degree of, scientific investigation. You can question and see whether or not their story stands up to scrutiny. So that is the big picture. Last chapter 1, we focused on what's the essence of testimony. And we described that Maimonides quotes the Mishnah that says that there are 7 questions that are the essence of the testimony. And they are questions that would help pin the time and place of the event. And just to remember quickly, we said the 7 questions are: what's 7-year cycle? In biblical Israel, the entire economy was based on the 7-year sabbatical cycle. So what's sabbatical cycle? What year? What month? What day of the month? What day of the week? What time? Which place? That is the 7 questions. If you don't know the answer, if any of the witnesses don't know the answer to these 7 questions, it's not a testimony. There is something that I said last week, Maimonides said last week, which is a little bit, I'm just going to mute because it's a little bit noisy, but if anyone has a question, feel free to unmute. There is one more point that Maimonides says, which is a little bit controversial as we will speak. Maimonides also believes that one of the essential components of the testimony is to say what happened. In other words, if you kill somebody, what was the weapon? The reason why I say it's controversial is because this doesn't say so explicitly in the Mishnah. It doesn't say so explicitly in the Talmud. Maimonides understands it to be obvious. So the Mishnah says there are 7 chakirot, 7 essential questions. And Maimonides says, yeah, that's in addition to the crux of the matter, which is what's the weapon? In other words, what exactly happened? So we're going to get into that debate in a minute. We also discussed last week that in addition to those questions, there is also essential questions. There is also other questions that they would ask just about peripheral matters. And in that we said the more questions the court asks, the better off they are. Okay, so that is chapter 1. Now we move to chapter 2. Chapter 2 has a few points. The beginning of the point of chapter 2 is, if I come into court and I want to testify, could I say, I don't remember? In other words, what happens, where does the I don't remember play in? Today, if you go to, if you're ever deposed, I don't think you should be, but if you ever were, if you have a good lawyer, or if you don't have a good lawyer, the bottom line is most people get up and, of course, everybody forgot everything. That's just the way it works. You start being questioned, I don't remember. So the question becomes, if I go into court and I say, I don't know, the question becomes then, does that disqualify my testimony? And of course, the Jewish answer is it depends. And this is again a differentiation between the original 7, what they call chakirot. Chakirot is the essential questions, and the bdikot means the additional questions. So the essential questions, both witnesses have to give a definitive answer. If one of the witnesses say, I don't know, regarding the essential questions, it is not a testimony. However, regarding the peripheral stuff, I say the murderer, was he wearing a white shirt or a black shirt? Here, if somebody says he doesn't know, then the testimony could still stand. So that's what we're going to read about in section 1 of chapter 2. So that's just a big picture. How much can one or both of the witnesses say, I don't remember. So I'm going to read it. I'm going to read, hopefully I'll read the first two paragraphs, and you can follow along or you can listen. And if anybody wants to ask any questions, hopefully right after we finish this section, we'll open up the floor to discussion. Here we go. What is the difference between chakirot and derishot and bedikot? These are just fancy words for what we said earlier. Chakirot and derishot are the essential questions. Bedikot are the additional questions. So Maimonides continues, with regard to the chakirot and derishot, the 7 essential questions. If one witness gave specific testimony and the second says, I do not know, their testimony is of no consequence. So 2 people say there was a murder or a loan. We'll get to loans later. There's a murder. And one person says, well, they asked him, when did it happen? He says, oh, it happened on Tuesday. He gives the date on Tuesday. And the other guy, you asked the other one, when did it happen? He says, I don't remember. It was Tuesday, Wednesday, I don't remember. So in that case, if you say you don't know, it's not testimony, because regarding regarding the essential questions, both witnesses must give definitive answers. With regard to the bedikot, by contrast, when it comes to the other questions, the non-essential questions, even if both of them say, I don't know, their testimony is allowed to stand. So let's say the questioners, the judges, ask the witnesses, okay, you say there was a murder. So was the murderer wearing, what color sneakers was the murderer wearing? If one person says white sneakers and the other person says, I don't know, here we say the testimony stands. However, this is interesting. If both say they don't know, the testimony stands. If one person says he was wearing white sneakers and the other person says he was wearing black sneakers, then even though this is a non-essential question, but because it was a contradiction, the testimony is nullified. So you could say you don't know. Both parties could say they don't know, but they cannot contradict each other. Now, of course, if the court asks many questions and both witnesses say I don't remember to every question, then the judges are not going to accept the testimony. But just because I forgot I don't know one detail, that doesn't nullify the testimony. Even if both parties don't know one detail, it also doesn't nullify the testimony. But if they contradict each other, even in the questions that are non-essential, then the testimony is not valid. If, however, so I'm reading the last line of the first paragraph, if, however, they contradict each other, even with regard to the bedikot, which is the non-essential questions, their testimony is nullified. But that's the big principle. And now Maimonides plays it out. He spells it out again, so that I don't think there's going to be any big new ideas here, but he's going to play it out. What is implied? The witnesses testify that one person killed another. One of the witnesses specified the year of the 7-year cycle, the year, the month, the date, the day of the week, Wednesday, the time, 12 noon, and the place of the murder. So one person one of the witnesses answers definitively to all the 7 essential questions. Similarly, they asked him, with what did he kill him? And he answered with a sword. Remember, I told you that according to Maimonides, the murder weapon is an essential component of the testimony as well. Some disagree, but according to Maimonides is following his consistent view here. If the second witness outlined his testimony in the same manner, except for the time, i.e., he said, I do not know the time of the day at which the murder took place. Was it 1 o'clock? Was it 3 o'clock? I don't know. Remember, in those days, not everybody had an iPhone. Not everybody had a watch. So it's likely that I don't know the difference between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock. But nevertheless, if the person cannot testify, that cannot say what time it happened, or he was able to specify the time, but said, I don't know what he used to kill him. He doesn't know what the murder weapon was. I did not take notice of the murder weapon. Their testimony is nullified. Why? This is spelling out the point that I mentioned earlier. Maimonides said in paragraph 1, when it comes to the essential questions, you cannot say, I don't know. If you don't know, it's not a testimony. If, however, they outline all the above factors identically, but were asked, was he dressed in black or white? Okay, so this is a non-essential question. It's not critical to the testimony to know what the person was wearing. So in this case, their testimony is allowed to stand. Their testimony is allowed to stand if they replied, we don't know. We did not pay attention to factors like these, which are of no consequences. And the next section we're going to learn, but if they contradict each other, even with regard to the non-essential questions, the testimony is nullified. And I want to read it because it's still part of the same idea, then we open up the floor. So I'm reading number 2. If one of the witnesses said he was wearing black clothes, and the second one said, that is not so, he was wearing white clothes. So now the witnesses are contradicting each other in a non-essential manner, in a question that's not essential. Their testimony is nullified. It is, as one said, it took place on Wednesday, and the other said it took place on Thursday, in which instance the testimony is of no consequence. Or it can be compared to a situation where one said he killed him with a sword, and the other says he killed him with a lance. The need for corroboration of the witness's testimony is derived from Deuteronomy 13:15, which states, and the matter is precise. If they contradicted each other in the matter, their testimony is not precise. So now Maimonides gives a biblical source for the fact that the witnesses cannot contradict each other, even in a matter that is not essential to the essential testimony, not part of the 7 questions. For example, what color shirt was the person wearing? Yet, if they contradict each other, says Maimonides, then this is not consistent with the verse that says the matter must be precise. And if the 2 witnesses are contradicting each other, even in a non-essential matter, then it is not precise, and the testimony is nullified. So that is the story. The first major point here. Could you say you don't know, or could both of them say you don't know? The answer is, when it comes to the essential components of the testimony, the 7 questions of time and place, and according to Maimonides, the actual essence of the testimony, in other words, the crime weapon, the murder weapon, Maimonides says, so that then the law would be that they must know. If they don't know, it's of no consequence. Regarding other matters, what we call the b'dikot, the other non-critical questions, over there, what color shirt was the person wearing? If the person was wearing, if they contradict, if one witness or the other witness both say they don't know, that's okay. But if they contradict each other, then the testimony is nullified. So that's interesting, that the difference between, you don't have to know everything, but you can't contradict the other witness. So that's the first major point of chapter 2. If anybody wants to make any comment, go ahead. I'll make the first comment, which is that they do studies now and they realize that people don't really remember what they see. So they send a mock murderer into a law school class, and then he runs in, commits the crime, and runs out. And then the professor asks the students, what was the person wearing? Nobody could remember. People think they remember, but they don't remember. So the idea of eyewitness testimony lately scientifically is being questioned. And this also brings about the importance of the Torah system, where you have 2 witnesses, because when you have 2 witnesses corroborating the same story, it's more likely that the story is correct. Later, we'll talk about what happens when there's a big group of people and they can't get the story together. That's where things become interesting. That's in section number 3. But before we go to section 3, if anybody wants to comment, like they say in Russian, pazhalista.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I'd like to ask you, at what age do you study this in yeshiva? Because this is extraordinary education for young people in terms of intellectual discipline.
Well, the 4th grade. That's 3rd grade, 4th grade. Yeah, that's when you start studying Talmud. Yeah.
That is, what we're talking about, for young kids to be thinking this precisely, is extraordinary.
Yeah, that's what keeps us off the streets. That's why we try not to loot people, because we're busy trying to figure out which testimony should be accepted and which testimony should be rejected. So we don't have time to get into trouble.
I'm talking about the precision.
Yes.
Focus. Also, one additional question. Maimonides was a physician. It's extraordinary he had this kind of sophistication when it came to the law. What do you make of that?
I think Maimonides his capabilities were so broad. I mean, that's what's remarkable. Today, people are experts in one field or in one discipline, and people either have a generalized knowledge in many fields, but usually expertise is in one field. And Maimonides has had an expertise in so many areas, certainly so many areas in the Torah, but even beyond that, and philosophy and medicine. And it's absolutely remarkable how one person can do it, even just to codify the Talmud. Remember, today it's not so hard. You have a computer, you have a search engine. Maimonides did it on the run from persecution. No computer, no Word documents. It's unbelievable.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I have a question. So if two witnesses contradicted each other, their testimony is nullified and the criminal goes free?
That's the hard question. The answer is you want the short answer or the long answer? The short answer is yes. The short answer is yes, the criminal goes free. That's the short answer. In other words, the court does not, in other words, if you follow the law of the Torah, the burden the burden to be able to prosecute somebody is very high. You need two witnesses who know what they're talking about, right? And there's no circumstantial evidence. And many other forms of evidence that are allowed in the court today would be thrown out under the Torah system. Because the Torah's idea is that the purpose of the court is to find out the truth. That's what the purpose of the court is. It's not to find out how to keep public safety. It's to find out the truth. And if we don't know the truth, then we don't know. We're not saying the person is innocent, but we're saying that we don't know. If we don't know, we can't put a potentially innocent person in prison. So the very famous, I don't want to get political, but I'll quote his name anyway, very famous defense attorney in the United States is Alan Dershowitz. So Alan Dershowitz runs around saying that we'd rather have 9 guilty people free than 1 innocent person in prison. And when I heard that, I was very inspired until I realized that Maimonides says we'd rather have 999 people who are guilty free than having 1 person who is innocent in prison. So not 1 to 10, but 999 to 1,000. Now, this makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Why? Because how are you going to keep law and order? How are you going to prosecute the mafia? How are you going to prosecute crime? This is no way to prosecute crime. So if you follow the laws of the Torah, some would argue correctly, there's going to be absolute chaos. And the short answer is we have systems to protect it. We have systems to protect that. Sometimes the court could say, look, because of the circumstantial evidence, we're going to punish you. But the court doesn't say, the court has to say, this is not the Torah law. This is an exception. And what's the difference? Why is an exception so important? That's another whole discussion. We can get into it. But it's critical when the court says, we don't know what happened. We don't know. We think. And therefore, to protect us, this is a matter of security. It's not a matter of law. And because of that, there are tremendous ramifications of what the attitude of the court is. Is it, we looked at all the evidence and we think you're guilty? Or is it, according to the Torah, we can't prove you're guilty, but because crime is rampant, we have no choice. We have no choice but to make exceptions. And that's what we'll do. But there's a difference in how it would play out in society, and we could elaborate upon it, but maybe it's beyond the scope. But you see what I'm saying? We have to differentiate between what the Torah gives you confidence and say, you could say this happened only if there are 2 witnesses. If not, yeah, it's very likely it happened, circumstantial evidence, but it's not enough for us to declare definitively.
Yeah, but extreme situation is both witnesses are agreed on everything except the precise time, which is impossible actually, even nowadays.
Not a precise time, within the hour. Not precise minute, not precise second, within the hour.
Okay, it's still, okay. I don't know, it's 12 or 2. Definitely, okay, never know.
So here's the problem. Here's the problem, Zina. Here's the problem. The problem is that we'll get to it later, but a critical component of the trustworthiness of a testimony. I come and I say someone committed a crime, and I want society to kill the criminal based on my testimony, right? That's really what's happening here. So part of what gives me credibility is I'm taking a risk. What's the risk? The risk is I can be disproved. And if I'm disproved, then they'll kill me. Right? If I want to kill somebody else, then I'll be killed. How am I going to be disproved? The answer is very simple. If I say it happened 12 o'clock on Greenwich Avenue, and it turns out 12 o'clock I was at Todd's Point swimming in the beach, then you know I lied. Right? So one second. So therefore, the Torah is very, very, very clear that testimony has to be pinned down to a place and time that is specific. And if you can't, you're a wonderful person, but this is not testimony because it cannot be disproved. And if it can't be disproved, you're not taking the risk. And if you're not taking the risk, we're not going to trust you. Now, again, I acknowledge this is no way to prosecute crime. This is no way, if you're a district attorney, you don't like these laws. I understand that. But we have to try to get a little bit into the mind of the Torah. The mind of the Torah is the number one criteria where you would trust me to kill someone based on my testimony is I have to put my money where my mouth is. I have to take a risk. So what's my risk? What happens today? Today, if I go to court and I say that this person, my neighbor, killed someone, what happens if they find out that I'm lying? I say, oh, I didn't realize I made a mistake. I thought it was a different person, right? There's no real consequence. Here, there's a real consequence. And because there's a real risk, that's the protection of the person is saying the truth. And the only way to achieve this from the Torah's perspective, to have this risk of being disproved, is if you could pin it down. So now I want you to continue asking me, but I want you to clarify. Is your question a practical question or a logical question? In other words, Maimonides is talking about, the Torah is talking about logic. Now there's a different question. Practically, how are you going to prosecute crime if you behave this way? That's a practical question. So I'm open to all questions, but I just want whoever's asking, I want you to define, is your question a practical question or is it a logical question? Not that practical is not logical, but I mean, what's bothering you? Is it bothering you the practical application or the idea?
No, what bothers me, it's a set of mind of a witness. The witness going to the court with the wonderful intentions, and he only provides what he knows. And he might not know just between 12 and 2. And at this very point, he has discredited himself and he let the criminal free.
Oh, so 1 second. There's 2 points here. Forget about the criminal going. That's a different question. He doesn't discredit himself. He says he doesn't know. You know what they tell him? They tell him, have a nice day. You're an upstanding citizen. We'll buy you a cake. We'll give you a certificate. We'll frame it. You're a wonderful person. But could we use your testimony to prosecute somebody? Absolutely not. But it doesn't mean, it's not a statement about you.
Which means the witness is not going to want to testify because nobody is actually so certain in what they see. You know that.
Okay, so if you're not certain about what you saw, then we can't put somebody in an electric chair. We can't kill someone based on testimony if the witness is not certain.
But we are talking just about small change between 2 o'clock and 12 o'clock.
I hear you. You're saying we agree. You're saying that people who are not absolutely certain will not testify. And you say it's a problem. And I say that's what the Torah wants. We want to weed out the people who are not looking at their watch at the time of the crime.
Okay.
Right? So we agree. We're not in disagreement about what the effect of this is. Okay. We're not in disagreement. We both agree about the reality. The question is, why is this the reality? The Torah wants, if you're coming in and you want to take away someone's liberty or you want to take away somebody's life based on a testimony, you better know what time it was. And if you see...
I'm just thinking about a normal person.
Let me give you an example. Zina, let me give you an example. Let's say, God forbid, I'm walking down the street and I see a hit and run. What's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to look at the license plate number. Hopefully, I can remember the license plate number, right? Maybe I'll report a crime. So there are things you do when a crime happens to try to, if you want to testify, there are things you do. If you want to report it, there are things you have to do, right? You know, they had... So the point I'm just trying to say that if I saw a crime and I want to testify, in addition to looking at the person's license plate number, I also have to find out the time. And I don't have to find out to the minute or to the second, but I have to know which hour, within the hour.
Right, which means if I see the crime and I'm not sure the license plate is what I saw, so I'd rather not to, which means in my mind, I let the criminal go free.
Okay. Well,
Even my partial testimonial will do the job, but I'm not going there because my character will be kind of under question.
Character will be not in question. Your character, you're going to get a certificate from the court. I'm just exaggerating. You're going to be an upstanding citizen. We're going to all chip in and buy you a birthday cake. There's nothing wrong with your character.
I'd rather not testify and be upstanding citizen, which didn't help.
That's okay. That's okay. Okay, look, I want to move on because we're not going to solve this. In other words, I understand that applying this practically is going to lead to some difficulty in persecuting crime and encouraging people to testify. All this is good. We want to try to figure out. It's clear that the Torah has one purpose only. This is not a law about how to maintain order in the community. That is a different section of Maimonides, when Maimonides says, what do we do when crime becomes rampant and the regular laws are not enough to stop the crime? That's a different section. Right now, we want to know, what does the Torah lay out? How do you know for certain? Nothing is for certain. We never know for certain. We're human. We never know for certain. But if we're going to kill somebody based on testimony, what do we need to know? And I want to tell you that you look at the United States of America of how many people we kill, and based on what evidence we kill, it's so different than what the Torah is laying out. The Torah is laying out, I would argue that probably almost 100% of the executions in the United States would not pass under the criteria of testimony in the Torah. Probably 100%, but certainly 99.9. So it's a different world. And the Torah basically wants to tell us that, look, you have to have some humility. We don't always know what happened. If you're going to kill somebody based on testimony of witnesses, this is the minimum that you must know. And the minimum is, yes, these 7 questions, time and place, and ask as many questions as you can. Regarding the other questions, if the person does not, if the witnesses do not contradict, if one of the witnesses do not know, that's okay. But if they contradict each other, even in regarding matters that are not critical to the case, for example, what color sneakers was the person wearing? If they contradict each other, you throw out the testimony. So now you're going to say, well, the criminal will get away. You're right. You're going to say that no one wanted to testify. You're right. You'll say crime rates may go up. You're right. We'll deal with all that. But before that, we want to know when could we be certain? When do we have confidence? Nothing is certain. When do we have confidence that we can accept testimony? This is the criteria. This is the law. Now we have exceptions. Okay, we'll deal with the exceptions when they come about. Okay, if anybody else wants to make a comment, otherwise we continue.
Rabbi, one very succinct question. It sounds as if from early on, Judaism was primarily focused on reason, rationality, and logic rather than feelings and intuition.
Certainly when it comes to law. When it comes to law, when it comes to law, when it comes to laws is a place where we try to, at least criminal law, we're trying to determine the truth. And the truth, and certainly we try and determine the truth when it comes to matters of, it's almost certainly life and death issues. So you have to be logical. You can't do, what do they call it? You can't do, what do they call justice of the masses? There's a word for it. There must be a word for when the masses try to implement justice. You have to be logical, and you have to be intellectual about it. Absolutely. Absolutely. Mob rule is what I was looking for. Mob rule. We don't do mob rule. Okay, and I thought this is a simple piece of Maimonides, non-controversial. We're going to have a sail through the Tuesday morning. It'll be wonderful. No, I won't rock the boat. Thank God this is a Torah study. This is like a yeshiva where there's intellectual warfare, which is good. So it's wonderful. So thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we continue. This is number 3 is an interesting discussion. It's a little bit I don't know how deep we want to go into this, but there is a problem here. Maimonides seems to be contradicting himself in other places. So I'm not sure how much to go into it, but it may be fun to try to clarify, to try to figure out what Maimonides says and what the commentaries say, what the seeming. Let me just submit it for the trucks to pass. That's your, yeah. That's your tax. I don't know. Yeah, I think they volunteer. That's the fire department in Greenwich working. So you rest assured that if you're ever in any trouble, they're going to come get you. Okay. So one thing we can do is we can read the Maimonides, and I'll present. I'll try to present the question, the contradiction that the commentaries raise, and then the resolution, possible resolution. But we'll see how much we want to get into it. Here's the big picture. What happens if a crime happens, and many people witness the crime? And they all come to testify together. And it turns out that amongst this group, there's more than two witnesses, but amongst this group, there is witnesses that are disqualified for whatever reason. They don't know what happened, they're lying, they're wicked, they don't have credibility, whatever the matter is. So this is a strange law, but I'll put it out right here. If there's a group of witnesses, and some are disqualified, the entire testimony is disqualified. That's the law. Why that is another discussion. It's derived from a verse in the Torah. The Torah says that you follow, any matter should be established based on 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses. So the obvious question is, if a matter is established by 2 witnesses, why does the Torah then have to clarify 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses? That's the Talmudic question. And the answer is, it's teaching you that just like 2 witnesses are 1 unit, so too 3 witnesses are 1 unit. And therefore, if 3 witnesses show up and 1 of them are disqualified, so even though you can argue and say the other 2 are upstanding, so why don't you establish the matter based on the 2? We say no. Just like 2 are 1 unit, 3 are 1 unit. And therefore, if the 3rd gentleman is disqualified, all 3 are disqualified. That's the law in other matters. Here is where it starts getting a little bit messy. So let's read number 3 and we'll see what happens. The following rules apply if there were many witnesses. So we're just going to, for the sake of simplicity, we'll say 3 witnesses show up. If 2 of them testified in a like manner with regard to the Chakirot and the Rishot, their testimony is allowed to stand and the defendant is executed. Even though the 3rd witness says, I don't know. So here's the scenario. 3 people show up and they ask them all the 7 questions. 2 of them know the answers. One guy says, I don't know. What time was it? I don't know. Maimonides says, the guy who says, I don't know, disregard him. Don't worry about him. Throw him out. Ignore him. And unlike I said a few moments ago, you could accept the testimony of the 2. And therefore you can kill in other words, you could punish the murderer or the suspect. Okay. If, however, that witness contradicts the other 2, even with regard to the B'dikot, the testimony is nullified. This is very strange. Again, next scenario, 3 people show up. 2 people know everything, they get everything right. The 3rd guy, again, case 1 was the 3rd guy said, I don't know. If you don't know, we say, go home, we don't need you. We'll establish the testimony based on 2 people. But the next case, this case, is number 3, doesn't say, I don't know, but he contradicts the other 2, even regarding a matter that's not critical. So the first 2 know all the answers, and then they say, what color sneakers was he wearing? They're going to say he was wearing white sneakers. And the 3rd guy, if he says, I don't know what color sneakers he was wearing, we send him home, and we accept the testimony of the 2. If the 3rd guy says he wasn't wearing white sneakers, he was wearing red sneakers, then the entire testimony is nullified. Even though you have 2 witnesses that are saying the testimony and they know all their answers, and seemingly, why don't you just separate them the way you did in the first clause? So that's what's interesting here. So I'm just going to repeat it and then say what the problem is and say what the solution is. So again, case one, 3 witnesses show up. Case 1 is 2 of them two of them corroborate their testimony. They know all the answers. Everything is fine. The third one says, I don't know. What do? We separate. We send the third one home, and we accept the testimony of the two. Okay, wonderful. Clause number 2, case number 2, 3 people show up. 2 of them testify, and their testimony stands up. They're consistent with their testimony. The third guy contradicts them, even in a matter that's not critical. In that case, you say the entire testimony is nullified. Why? Because he contradicts them. In the first case, he said he doesn't know. This case is much worse. He contradicts them. That's Maimonides. That's number 3. I'm hesitating if I should go into the discussion. We'll go into the discussion. Why not? What's at stake here? What's happening here? So the commentaries ask a very, very powerful question. They say seemingly the first clause of the first case is inconsistent with the Talmud. Why? Because I just gave you the introduction. The Talmud says that a testimony that part of it was nullified, all of it is nullified, right? 3 people show up, and one person turns out to be problematic. Whatever the reason is, we nullify all 3. We don't separate the one from the 2. So why is it that in the first clause, when the guy says, I don't know, why is it that we say, the third guy who says he doesn't know, we send him home, and we accept the testimony of the 2? This is a big problem. And all the commentaries of Maimonides try to answer what is Maimonides talking about. And I couldn't figure out, I wasn't going to bring it up because the answers are complicated. Until about 20 minutes before we started the class, I ran into a very elegant answer. And it's so elegant, I said, I must tell you the answer. It's so beautiful. And here's the answer that I think is very elegant. Maimonides says like this. This is how they explain Maimonides. If the third guy contradicts the 2, he is part of the group of witnesses, and therefore, consistent with the law, that a testimony that some of it is nullified, the whole group is nullified. And therefore, in the second case, if the person says, the 2 witnesses say he was wearing white sneakers, and the third witness contradicts and says he was wearing red sneakers, the whole testimony is nullified. We send them all home. Why? Because that's consistent with the law that part of the testimony is nullified, the entire testimony is nullified. And here's the big idea that we think Maimonides comes up with this on his own. We don't know of any source of this in the Talmud. Maimonides says in case 1, where 2 people say the guy was wearing white sneakers, and the third guy says, I don't know, Maimonides says, send the third guy home. Why? If you say you don't know, you're not part of the testimony. You're not part of the witnesses. Right? What was the logic? The logic is if 3 people testify together and one is found to be disqualified, you disqualify all of them, but that's only if 3 people testify together. Someone who says, I don't know, is not part of the testimony. So by saying, I don't know, you can't undermine the other 2 who do know. I thought that's quite elegant. The difference between contradicting the 2, if you're saying a positive statement that's contradicting, then you're a witness, you're testifying, and you're disagreeing with the other people, so the whole testimony falls down. But if you're the third guy and you say you don't know, then if you don't know, you're not really the third guy. If you don't know, you don't know. If you don't know, then you're not part of the testimony. So in that sense, Maimonides would say, okay, go home, you're not part of it, and we're going to accept the other 2. So this is the big idea. I'm going to open it up for questions. I just want to say that after this is only one more law to finish the chapter. It's quite straightforward. So after we take the questions, I'll take another 2-3 minutes just to give you the general idea. And then we get to chapter 3. Next week, chapter 3 is fascinating. We go to another direction, and I'm looking forward to it. I thank you very much for joining. If anybody has any questions on what we said, go ahead. Otherwise, I'm just going to, like I said, make a dash at the end of the chapter, and we will summarize that.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have a question about the last scenario. What if the third witness has a personal interest in the criminal go free?
Then if a person shows up, a third witness to testify, and it turns out he's a relative of one of the parties, then he's sent home. But not only do we send him home, we send home the other 2. That's the point here. The point here is if the third person is disqualified for whatever reason, the Talmudic law is the entire group of witnesses are nullified. And one of the criteria that will disqualify a witness is personal interest. Absolutely.
But how you detect the personal interest if it's not a relative?
That's a good question. We discussed that. That's a good question. But let's assume we found out that it is a personal interest. Okay? How again, there's 22 chapters. We can't do 22 chapters on a Tuesday morning. But let's assume we know that is a personal interest. That's another discussion how we get there. Some of it is spelled out. Some of it is you have to just use your logic. But if there's any personal interest, the third guy is disqualified. If the third guy is disqualified, the other two are also. It's a strange law, but that's the law derived from the Torah, derived from the verse, as we mentioned earlier.
How about...
Go ahead. A very simple question, but rather different. Does any of this apply to scientific research?
Well, we think that the only way you could test scientific research. You're saying interesting.
Yeah. Researchers come up with one conclusion. A third says it's not true.
I love this. I tell you why I love this, because I had trouble in my mind. If somebody would give me trouble on this law of why are you disqualifying the whole group and not just accept the two, I wouldn't know how to defend it. But you gave me the answer. I'll tell you how you gave me the answer. Because the researchers are always extrapolating from data, and the devil is hiding in the data. In other words, if you manipulate the data, you're manipulating the study, right? So I'm not a researcher here, but I suppose we do have some of them on the call. So the point is this: the point of the matter is as follows: you have a sample of data, and if you disqualify a certain percentage of the sample of the data, you're going to get to a false result. So in this case, 3 people show up to the courts. One person contradicts the 2. If I send the third guy home and I only accept the 2, what I'm doing is I'm messing with the underlying data, because the underlying data here is that the 3 people who came are disqualified. So it's like a scientist who would say, I don't like a certain percentage of the data because I don't like the conclusion. So I'll only look at a certain area of the data. That's flawed. So thank you, doctor. You helped me explain this law. I'm indebted to you forever because of this.
Thank you.
For other matters, but because of this as well. You're laughing, but the ethics of the father say that if anybody teaches somebody even one piece of wisdom, you have to call him my teacher forever. And the proof is this: David, who there was a person who taught him one law, and for the rest of his life, King David called him my teacher, my master. So you're my teacher and my master. Thank you.
You made my day, Rabbi. Thank you.
You made my day. Okay,
my question is much simpler. My question is much simpler. And if the criminal has a co-conspirator, which always showed up if everything goes wrong. He showed up in the room and he said, yeah, it was that time, everything was fine. No, it was red sneakers.
It's a good question. It's a good practical question. Let me think about it. How do you protect against that? That's a good question.
And he's not a relative, so you can do this. It's just a co-conspirator, very much hidden in other times, but always ready to be in the crime scene.
That's a good question.
That's how I would make crime.
Yes.
It's like my dad would tell me. My dad tells me he doesn't understand why they teach Talmud in the 3rd grade. I said, what's the matter? It's brilliant. He says, no. What you're doing is you're teaching all the 3rd graders how to lie. Because typically 3rd graders don't really know how to lie, but you're teaching them. It's a good question. But again, the point of the matter is, what's the alternative? The alternative is when you have, it's a good question.
I want to make a comment to defend Maimonides.
Oh, good.
Because a lot of what he's saying in these chapters is not very easy to manipulate. So right. I want to say that the entire Talmud, actually, the approach is algorithmic. They didn't have, you just mentioned statistical approach, and right now we have millions of cases. Right. We can, even if something doesn't make sense, but we can see it doesn't work, we can adjust because it doesn't work. At that time, there was maybe Bobruisk and Nasovici, 3 Jews there, 2 Jews there. There is just no way to have statistical approach to solve the problem. And even jury, where do you find 12 Jews that would sit down for 12 months and decide that it was impossible? Right. The only way to solve these problems is to create algorithm. And the main problem of any algorithm that it could be abused. I would immediately, if I were there, create a corporation that would give supply witnesses, well-trained, it's outstanding citizens. They would be paid billions behind the scene, but one would be senator, another would be Nobel Prize laureate, and they would be trained. There is no way to catch them, and I would kill anybody I would want. So any algorithm is subject to abuse because it's an algorithm. The reason I want to defend Maimonides is not only it was the only way at that time to solve this problem. Otherwise, you have to just give power to judges, whatever they say, like kings. And he wanted it to make more democratic and understandable. And second thing, even now, I think we are losing logical approach. We are not discussing, we are saying, like in Kavanaugh, witnesses show up, they don't know anything, and people listen to them because they're crying when they talk about it. So we lost this logical approach, and it would be, and that's why it's useful not only because it's logical exercise to study Talmud, but there is something that could be used even despite all the statistics. In Russia, for example, there is a lot of statistics and all wrong. In Germany. So it's very important to have logical, rational, algorithmic approach with all the weaknesses of it. And that's what Talmud does, not only in law, but even to pick up the crop and everything. Not much data, but what makes sense? Let's do this.
Excellent point. Excellent point, Zach. Thank you very much. I like that. And I like the idea that you're right, any algorithm could be abused. That's a good point. I just want to say that I'm just going to say about training people to lie. It's not so easy. It's much, no, I agree with you. I'm just saying the broader point is you would really have to train people really well because a good questioning attorney could get two people to contradict each other. It's not, I'm just saying, just like you're training people to lie, there's people being trained to detect the liars. So in other words, to find a contradiction. So, but your point is 100% correct that we need to look at an algorithm could be abused, and we have to have more of this of the logical approach. I fully agree with you. Okay, I want to make a run because I'm going over time. It's 10:50. I want to just make a run to the end of the Maimonides, and the point is very simple. The point is, what happens if somebody? Let's talk about. We said we have to get the right date. So what happens if one person says it's the 4th of the month? And the other guy says it's the 5th of the month. So he's 1 day off. The answer is you're allowed to be 1 day off. That's only until day 15. After day 15, you can't be any days off. And it's just a function of the Hebrew calendar. With the Hebrew calendar, you never knew the month was established, a new month was established on the 1st of the month. In other words, it took time for people to learn the date. It took about 2 weeks for people to know when day 1 of the month is. And because they don't know what day one of the month is, they don't know what day 10 of the month is. In other words, every month could either be 29 days or 30 days. So you have a 2-week period where if some person says it's the 4th day and the other guy says it's the 5th day, you could say, well, they both are together. It's the same testimony. It's true. It's just that one person doesn't know that there was a 30th day added to the month. But after day 15, if they get 1 day off, the testimony is disqualified. That's one point. And one more point is about the time. He says that if one person says 2 o'clock and the other person says 3 o'clock, then it is proper testimony because it's customary for people. People could make a mistake with 1 hour. Remember, they're telling time based on the sun. So not everybody's an expert. And therefore, 1 hour mistake is fine. So if I say the murder happened at 3 and my partner says the murder happened at 4, that's okay. But if there's a 2-hour discrepancy, one person says 3 and the other person says 5, then then the testimony is not accepted. Similarly, there's one case where a person could make even a 5-minute mistake and a 5-minute discrepancy, and the testimony would not be accepted because it's clear if one person says it happened before sunrise and the other person said it happened 2 minutes later after sunrise, then even though it's only 2 minutes apart, nevertheless, the testimony is not accepted because it's obvious when sunrise is. So nobody would make a mistake. So here's a scenario where sunrise, one person says before sunrise, one person says after sunrise, even if it's just 2 minutes apart, the testimony is nullified. Again, today, no one knows when sunrise is. No one's awake during sunrise, certainly in the summer. But back in the day, the way people lived, people went to sleep at sunset. People got ready for bed at sunset, went to sleep at nightfall. Everybody was up at the crack of dawn because that was the true daylight savings. You're up at the crack of dawn because you can't watch Netflix at night. There's nothing to do. So you may as well enjoy the daylight. And then, so everybody knew what sunrise was, and therefore there was no mistake. So that's just more technical. I'm looking forward to next week, chapter 3 of testimony. And now we get to another whole discussion. What do we do when it comes to monetary law, and how do you rule based on documents if there are no two witnesses? And it opens up another whole area of discussion. And then we get back in chapter 4, we get back to criminal law, and the excitement continues. Thank you for joining. Thank you for everybody for contributing. And I'm looking forward to continuing our journey next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Wonderful day, everybody. Be well.
You too.